Hi, this is Cassie with MyCounselor.Online. Thanks for being with us today. And today I get the privilege of interviewing one of our awesome therapists, Melissa Abellio. Melissa, thanks for meeting with me today.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Cassie.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I got to dig into your article called Why Suffering, which I was super excited. I had just done a Bible study over Job. And so I was like, oh, this is going to kind of like piggyback on that. And it's going to be fun. We're talking about suffering. It's not fun, but, you know, insightful and valuable. So I was really excited about that. And just in transparency, I know that you have recently lost a baby to a genetic disorder. And so I think, as always, when we know somebody has been in a certain place, that they have wisdom and they have truly walked through it. You know, as I got your article and I started reading through it, like my heart was quiet and I was just like ready to really soak up what you had to say. So it's a beautiful article and I'm excited to get to chat with you about it today.
Thanks, Cassie. Appreciate that so much. Yeah, this article is definitely spurred on by just what I experienced and how God, I think, has been speaking to my heart around the idea of suffering. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, and I appreciate your vulnerability to be willing to share that with the kingdom. And I think that gets to some of the stuff that you say in the article. But to jump right in, you know, we've all seen horrible tragedy in the world. And we have the question, I think probably everybody who's been a Christian and is an adult with a bigger, better understanding of the world, like, why would a good God allow suffering? And so you talk about that and you relate it to the analogy of a beach, our understanding of that. And so I was hoping that you could share that because I thought it was really good.
You said I'm sorry, Cassie.
Oh, you related it to the analogy of a beach, like us trying to understand.
Yes.
So could you share that with us?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that being able to try to understand the gravity of who God is, because his thoughts are just not our thoughts and his ways are just not our ways. It really is like us trying to grab hold of all the little grains of sand on a beach, and it's just too vast for us to be able to comprehend. I think on such a
we can hold in our hand, we can see this, but you're like, we don't know what the rest of the beach looks like. And I loved that you started with that because I thought this is going to be such a good theologically sound article. Instead of trying to put God in a box, here's why they're suffering, this is what it means, you know, it's like, no, we aren't going to know, and this is why it's okay. And you talked about some practical things about suffering, like trying to wrap our brains around what we can, and about pain and how pain allows us physically to live in this world, you know. So talk about how that is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that's, you know, interesting is this concept of pain and how, you know, we experience it and God allows us to experience it. And I think the idea behind that, God allowing us to experience pain, is really deep and interesting because, you know, why would a good God allow us to experience pain? And just through my understanding, there's actually a really good book by Philip Yancey. It's about I think the title is Where is God When It Hurts? But he talks about this concept of how, you know, that people who struggle with leprosy, or not struggle, but they have leprosy, you know, they severely damage and harm themselves because they have no like pain receptors. And so he talks about how God designed pain really for us to be able to stay away from dangerous things. And even I think about that on an emotional level, like when we experience pain emotionally, oftentimes we experience it in a way that causes us to feel like, God, why am I even feeling like this? But that pain really is information on the dashboard, you know, of like a car, if you could think about it like that like this something needs attention in the same way that you have physical pain as well. And so I think that that concept of pain, God designing us with pain receptors,
Yeah.
has been built in for our protection.
I think about that too. Like when I'm thinking about if I'm upset about something, and I think, why am I upset? And it's a trigger to me on my boundaries. Oh, that's been crossed. Like I'm upset because it's been crossed. And if God hadn't given that to us, and you talk about too, which I thought was so interesting, if there were never any bad feelings or uncomfortable feelings, then would there really be feelings? It would all just be the same. So I thought that was really interesting and thought-provoking, to think about just how big God is and his ways, like you said, not being our ways. We see through a glass darkly, So that was so interesting. But we all have to grapple too with the idea that sin has affected God's perfect design of the world, and that Satan definitely wants to wreak havoc on our lives. And we see that in Job, where God allows Satan to wreak havoc in Job's life. And I was just wondering if you would talk a little bit about how sin and how our enemy affects our experience of pain.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, the enemy, it says that he comes to steal, kill, and destroy. I mean, I think in another verse it says he's the father of all lies.
Yeah.
And, I think that when pain occurs and suffering occurs, that's not really as a result of sin, but because of like things that we've done. It's because literally something's occurring and happening. I think that's where Satan begins to whisper in our ear about God and about God's heart for us and about his desire for us to suffer, and he doesn't care and he doesn't love us. I think, when sin entered the world, like, all of creation was altered. And I think that, Satan really does wreak havoc on us when suffering occurs, because if we're struggling and we're doubting in God, like he whispers lies into our ear about him. And he did that to Eve. I mean, when you look at, they were in a perfect garden.
And we've seen it from the beginning.
Exactly. And she, he kind of is basically, he's lying to her. He's like, did God really say this? Is he really
God's words? That's his whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is God really who he says he is? I think when suffering occurs, I think that's Satan's biggest whisper.
Yeah, totally. Talk about walking through suffering. And I love that you mentioned, like, we have to walk through it. Like, Psalm 23, we often quote that, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. You just mentioned, like, but you're walking. Like, you are moving. You are not parked. You are not setting up your tent. Like, you might be trudging, but you are going.
Yeah.
So I thought that was so good. And I was just, some of the things you mentioned in the walking process is grumbling versus lamenting biblically. And so could you explain the difference between grumbling and lamenting?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's a large difference in our hearts between, a lament or crying out to God, which is us sharing like our true feelings with him. Yeah. And I think oftentimes Christians feel guilty approaching God, with that kind of honesty because they feel like they're grumbling. Now I think the difference between like sharing our heart with God and like kind of crying out to him, like the way that Jesus did or the way David did when they were in pain.
Yeah, that's a biblical example.
Yes, a biblical example. I mean, Jesus did cry out.
Yes,
Jesus was like, where are you, God? Like, why have you forsaken me? He's crying out to him in that way. And in Job, we see that he's crying out as well. And I think that the grumbling piece that's a little bit different than that is, when we go to God and we are like defying him in our grumbling, like
this wasn't a good idea. You really screwed this up, God.
You really screwed this up, God. And then we're, in our lives defying him as well. I mean, you really do see that with the Israelites a little bit. they are not just crying out to God, they're grumbling, and then they're defying him in their life. And I think that's a little bit different.
So well for them.
Yeah, it didn't go so well for them. I think that's a little bit different than crying out to God and saying, God, where are you? Why is this happening? I need your help. I want to understand.
Yes.
That's so different than, God, what's wrong with you? Because you're not doing this, I'm going to go do this,
If you were good, you never would have let this happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We cannot begin to comprehend who he is and his great plan for us, especially when we're in the middle of suffering. It's so hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's a hard thing to walk through. And then I was hoping you could talk about the difference between grieving and mourning.
Yeah.
Between those two.
Absolutely. So I think there is a difference between grieving and mourning. I think the idea of grieving, when you study this out in the scriptures, from my understanding, grief is something that it's a loss. It's something that we have to be able to process through on our own.
Yeah.
And it's kind of us walking through the pain, walking through the incomplete.
Internal thing, you would say?
Yes, very internal thing. Yes, us walking through the incomplete things maybe that we didn't get to say or experience through what we've lost, whether that's a loss of trust or a loss of a person or a loss of a marriage, whatever that is. Us being able to work those things out individually, personally. And I think mourning is more of something you do with others. You allow them to become a part of, and you kind of welcome them into your grieving process. That is the mourning piece. And I love, says that those who mourn will be comforted.
Yes.
In the Beatitudes, and this idea that if we allow others to come alongside us in our grief, if we mourn outwardly, that it's a promise. It says we're going to receive comfort. Yeah. And so I thought that was a really powerful concept, because I always thought them as synonymous things.
Right, I did too.
Mm-hmm.
I loved how you broke them apart and how you use, biblical examples of what they look like. And it's so encouraging. It just, the more I grow and mature in my walk and the more I study, I'm so it all comes back to relationship. It all comes back to relationship and communication.
Yeah.
And that's another aspect of God's I didn't make you to do life alone. You need this community. You need each other. So that was a beautiful picture, I thought.
Yes.
You talk about how great suffering and great honor are kind of weaved together throughout the scriptures, and I couldn't help but think of Jesus. He suffered the most out of anybody, and yet God has honored him above everybody. It's such a beautiful picture. I think that's so comforting when we are suffering. It's God hasn't forsaken us. He's chosen us. He's favored us. We say, and I'm going to quote this because I just thought this was so powerful. When suffering occurs, this is usually when we learn and begin to understand the true nature of God. I thought that was amazing. I mean, I have experienced that myself, so it totally rang true.
Yeah, I do think there's an aspect of when we are, weak, God really is strong. We see God for who he is.
Yes.
Truly, there's a view of God that we can't experience without God.
When we feel like everything's pretty much going okay, we're not as in tune to who he is in relationship to who we are.
Yes.
So for those who are walking through this journey, what are a few practical things that you would say to them to end this video?
That's a great question. I really would encourage them to lament. I mean, I love the book of Lamentations. I love that God had a whole book of Lamentations.
Yes.
Confirmed that I could cry out to him, and I could even maybe feel like I'm whining a little bit to him.
Yeah.
Because and I feel like that's really tough. I mean, probably even for men, especially because in man school you don't really, it's not okay for you to lament or feel or be sad. And so I think just really allowing yourself to identify what you're feeling and really take that to God and to feel like that is just and good and really, you know, welcomed by him. I think the other thing is,
I just want to pop in there. Those biblical examples you gave, Jesus and David, they were men. Like it's
we're men.
It's okay.
Yes.
It's not just a girl thing.
Yes, it's so true. And I really appreciate, you know, like thinking about some of the clients I have that are men that let themselves go there. I'm just like, wow, you know, there's
powerful.
So
yeah.
powerful.
It's so brave and so awesome. Like that is a man thing to do. David was a man's man. Like he killed a bear with his bare hands. Like you don't get more manly than that.
It's so true, Cassie. It's so true. So yeah, there's that whole view of, you know, manliness in society. But then you look at somebody like David, who was like totally vulnerable with God, and yet was killing bears, you know, with his bare hands. It's pretty amazing. Yeah, and I think the other thing is just really allowing others to be a part of that process with you. So being able to allow people that are safe, people who are supportive, people who can just be. I mean, I think about Job's friends who were just with him for 7 days and sat in silence. I think finding
the best 7 days out of this.
Yeah, exactly. That's when his friends were doing a good job, I think. But you know, finding those friends who will just be with you in your suffering and in your mourning, and just allowing them to sit with you with that. And I think also if your grief is feeling, you know, or your loss or your sadness, you know, that you're experiencing from whatever suffering you're experiencing, I think if it becomes so overwhelming that you're experiencing any kind of like long-term depression like symptoms, I definitely encourage you to allow a therapist to come alongside you as well. In your
walking through that process.
Yeah, and walking through that process with you, because there is a way to walk through loss and suffering that is effective and useful, and I think there's ways that are not effective and useful. And so walking through that with somebody who's a professional who knows how to walk through that with you, I think is really, it could be
absolutely
more effective.
Yeah, helpful. It makes an otherwise utterly consuming process, you know, enough that you can chew it, enough that you can walk through it instead of feeling like you only can camp there.
Yeah.
So that's so good. Melissa, I have loved reading your article and just being able to interview you about this. It feels like such a privilege and an honor knowing what you've been through. And I can just like talking about God honoring people, like I just honor you and appreciate your vulnerability to share your experience with the church and with people, because we need that. We need that. We need each other. You are each other, and you are, can be a tool in helping people walking through their process. So thank you so much for being with me today and for sharing this. And if you want to read, Melissa has another article out about the loss of a parent. So I would definitely encourage you to check out that article and all her other great articles on MyCounselor.Online. Thanks, Melissa.
Thanks, Cassie.